This is Brad Bailey. The date is November 21st, 2018. I'm in Chelsea, New York, with the Stonewall Oral History Project with Linda Rice. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. You too.
So, can you give me your birth date, where were you born, and we'll go from there.
Okay. My name is Linda Rice. I was born November 19th. The year?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Nin- you thought you weren't supposed to ask women their age.
Well,
1958. I was born and raised in Queens, New York.
okay. And so, what was your childhood like?
I don't know. I think standard, lower middle income upbringing. Uh, with my father around most of the time, but not always. Uh, I had two older brothers, all 2 years apart. My oldest sibling is gay, and the middle one is homophobic. So we're well rounded.
So you said the oldest.
I'm the baby.
You're the baby. Okay. So how much older is the oldest one?
We're all 2 years apart.
2 years apart. And so, what kind of work did your parents do?
My father was an accountant, and my mother was a secretary.
All right. And were they from New York City or?
Yes, they were both born in New York. My father's family is out of Detroit, and my mother's family out of Virginia.
And just if you can, just sort of give me a brief snapshot of what your childhood was like. You mentioned that one of your siblings was gay and the other was homophobic. Can you sort of describe that dynamic?
Growing up, let's see. I grew up during the era of the human rights struggle, civil rights struggle. There was, we were eventually bused into a different neighborhood to go to school because they were trying to get educational equality, I guess, which never entirely happened. So I was bused into a different neighborhood. So I went to school with mostly a white population, which then there were a lot of racial issues due to that stuff. My oldest brother. My oldest brother's gay. He didn't really come out until really sort of after high school, even though he probably had some inkling before then that he had, feelings for men. He came out after high school, and I also probably found women after high school. So I spent some time dating men, or boys, I guess, at the time.
And what age was around was that?
Well, I guess 13 probably had my first boyfriend.
So around 1971.
Yes. And then my first girlfriend, probably in 1977.
No, okay. No, I'm just curious. Yeah, that's why I let you just sort of finish that statement and we go from there. So, what did you, when did you said that your first girlfriend was around, like first boyfriend was around 13, but your first girlfriend was out 1977. So that would have made you almost 19, 20 years old.
Yes.
And so what was life like for a woman of color in 1977 with your first girlfriend? And you were still living in New York then, right?
I was still living in New York. I was still living at home with my mother at the time. And I had met, I was dating this guy. I was working in an after-hours club, and he was married. It so happened, and we used to meet in a gay bar that was near his house. So then I got introduced to this population, this other population of people. And one of the women, lived nearby me. So we would sometimes, come home together, on public transportation or whatever. And I got to know her, and then she ended up being my first girlfriend.
And what was that? What was life like for the both of you, sort of navigating those spaces in New York City as women of color in a relationship?
Well, I have to say I don't remember having so many issues, I'm going to say, but mostly because the people that I was surrounded by all probably had, issues of, violence and stuff like that. So they were all protective, and so I grew up learning to, to hide, in public. In public, you didn't necessarily, want to be, have, what is it, PDA, right? And only once that I can really remember just, walking down the street unprovoked, with people throwing bottles at us.
Where was
this was in Queens. But I just remember we were near the subway out by Sutphin Boulevard, and for no apparent reason, we were just walking down the street. But with, some of the women being, more butch, we were, outed. And so then they just, took it upon themselves to harass us, just going down the street.
And what did that feel? I mean, was that your first time?
That was, yes. I was scared. Obviously, I didn't, because to me, it was just completely unprovoked. Didn't know who the guys were, men. And I can't say that I necessarily remember how many of them there even were, but I'm going to say there were probably, because they were just some guys hanging out on the stoop or whatever, maybe 4 or 6 of them or something like that, and there were, I think, 4 of us, walking down the block. So, we were outnumbered. I think I remember that we were outnumbered. And then, with men, you think, they're bigger and, stronger anyway. So even if it was an even number, we were.
Black or Latino men, were they of color?
I think they were black. I'm pretty sure they were all black, but I don't really remember spending a lot of time looking at them. But it's definitely, a black and with some Latino population, the area, that we were in.
So did you, so from there, did you sort of enter the gay community at that point, or did you just continue having private relationships? When did you start becoming active in the sort of larger gay community as a whole?
There would have been, I had some issues with alcohol and drugs really very early on. I went into treatment at 22, I think, or something like that. And it was really after that that I actually came out. So even though I had been dealing with, women prior to that, I hadn't, I hadn't come out or really started identifying with the LGBT community until after that. So I was in Massachusetts. I went to treatment up there, and I stayed up there, and then that's when, I found this community, or I found my place.
Well, so the community was in Massachusetts?
Yes.
And so did you begin sort of activism work there, or and then come back down to New York, or would you stay there for a while?
Well, I was up there for about 17 years. And
in Boston? Or?
in Worcester, and then in Springfield.
Can you give me a sort of an idea of what that community was like?
When I was in Worcester, which was my early time there, and all of my interactions were really around AA and that community, because I went up to get sober, and that's the community that I that I first started to become familiar with. So there were gay AA groups and women's groups. So I can't say that my activism really started at that time, but that was really more when I was just embraced by the gay or lesbian community, because they were out in AA, and I guess really just like any place else, it was you were still really ostracized, so it was still better to find people of like minds in order to feel safe and to feel connected and not be harassed and put down by your just heterosexual counterparts.
And do you, but in terms of also race, could you talk to me a bit about race, especially up in somewhere like Worcester and Springfield? Like, how did race sort of play into some of the experiences you had as a woman of color, or LGBT woman of color?
Well, I always felt like I needed to be educating people, that I all of a sudden was surrounded by people that didn't really have any interaction with black people before me. So that was more probably annoying than anything else, because just little things that now you needed to like it was just a very different experience coming from New York, and New York being so completely diverse, to ending up up in Worcester, Massachusetts. I think that because AA was the community that I was in, that we really there was already some common ground, so I didn't have a lot of issues necessarily related to race, or problems, let me say, due to my race. I do remember I waitressed up there, for one time, and I remember, being, in a restaurant and having somebody come in and refuse to be served by me, and and this is in the 70s, maybe even early 80s or something like that, and this isn't something, that you really expect anymore. I mean, and I don't know if it's, me, I was, naive, or I just was often, just lucky enough to be around, really welcoming, sort of people. I just remember the experience itself being, kind of, traumatizing, and I'm not, I can't say that I ever remembered, any other time in my life, somebody like calling me a monkey and, really, just just really, really, outwardly racist.
Go ahead.
So, and, in large part, there were definitely underlying racial issues, like looking for an apartment, and, you're going through at the time the paper, finding an apartment, you go over there, they show it to you, and it's like, oh, it's rented, and then, running into that enough times to say, all of these things can't all of a sudden be rented after we get here, and then having to, then you send in, somebody else right behind you, and then it was like, oh no, it's not rented, so then, it was me and my girlfriend. I had a white girlfriend at the time, and that, we were trying to find an apartment together, and we would run into, stuff like that. But more, more undercurrent of, racial, stuff going on as opposed to, overt.
So do you, I remember that, not remember, but I read that you worked with the African Ancestral Lesbians United for Societal Change.
Societal change. Mm-hmm.
And so when did that process start? You mentioned that, you were in Massachusetts for 17 years, and then you moved to New York.
Then I came back to New York, yeah, and it was when I...
One second. Mm-hmm. This is Brad Bailey, recording 2 here on November 21st, 2018 in Chelsea, New York, the interview with Linda Rice. So you got back to New York?
Yes, I came back to New York in 1977, and at that time... 1997, sorry, 1997. And... I got a job, and I used to just, really go to work and come back home, and didn't really have, a lot of friends in the city. My brother, had suggested, he said, you need to go to the center. He's like, I go up there, and every Thursday, there's all these beautiful black women hanging around, and I should go up there. So the center was having an orientation, so I came up. And I found out I was looking for, I was almost 40 at the time. I was looking for, black lesbian groups. And I found out about Griot Circle. Griot Circle was for 50 and older at the time. So when I went by the table, they politely dismissed me and told me to come back in 10 years. And then I found the African Ancestral Table. So that's African Ancestral Lesbians United for Societal Change, ALUSH. I found their table. And even in the orientation, Candace Boyce spoke. And she was the one that introduced, that said something about the group. Also over at the table were Kim Ford, who was, I believe, running the group at the time, and Keisha, I think her name, Keisha. So I met them. Keisha and Kim were running the group at the time, and Candace Boyce was running. They had an over 40s group, so she was running that. I started out going to the over 40s group. They used to meet once a month, and the regular group met once a week.
And so, go ahead. That was that your first time sort of in a group like that dealt with, in a community sort of situation, a group with other African American women of color? Or lesbians of color?
Lesbians of color, yeah. It was, probably sort of familiar sort of group in AA. There was a women's group that I used to go to. But that was the first lesbian, group that I went to. So I first, so I started to make friends. Um, I had to come into the city to find out that, there was somebody that lived right in the next block from me. Uh, her name was Sylvia. Uh, so we started hanging out, at some point after that. Candace Boyce, became my partner. She was very, active in the gay and lesbian community. She worked here at the center at the time. Um, so this was my first involvement in, um, in anything where people were sort of politically, active, where it was important for women to make a stand and have their voices heard on different issues of whatever happened to be going on at the time. So either in the LGBT community or outside in just the black community. I think the first march that I probably went to had to do with, it was after the Abner Louima shooting.
So this is around 98, 99?
I'm gonna say yes because I don't really remember, but I definitely think it was in the 90s, and it was. Which I'm sure people know was the man that got shot 41 times when he was reaching for his wallet.
So do you, what sort of major issues did the group like deal with or handle? You mentioned that they were protests, but you mentioned the other issues like Abner Lima, but I want to sort of understand what particular issues that affect lesbians of color did the group deal with in around that period of time, if you can remember?
Well, in general, it, and then you could feel free to help. We dealt with really whatever we thought was going to empower, women at the time. So if it was, financial, sort of financial training, I would say, education, sex education,
Oh, sorry.
health.
For the record, we have
Maria
Maria
Hampton.
Hampton and
Justice.
Justice, also in attendance here at this recording. So just in case so go ahead.
Health, gynecological health, which was, which as turned out was really sort of important because there were quite a few, butch women that, really were sort of adverse to, taking care of themselves in certain ways because it went against their grain or something.
I'm confused about that. Could you give me details? Sorry, and this is Justice speaking for the record.
It was more so because of the experience that.
Sorry, I can't.
It was more me, Justice being a masculine woman. It was more so the medical field and how they handled masculine women or butchers or AGs or whatever. It just masculine.
Stands for what, for the record?
Aggressive woman. That's what it stands for. So a lot of times, as it pertains to a masculine woman's health, like for example, if it they have cancer or something that, had they got services early on, it wouldn't been as severe. Um, they will always find it in late stages, and it's because when you at the time when you go into the medical field, you were handled poorly. You understand? So you got immediate discrimination just based on your physical appearance. So a lot of masculine women shied away from getting the help that they need, and then so they needed like that kind of advocacy, not just Alush, but Audre Lorde and all these people had to advocate, what I'm saying, to make the medical world sensitive to women in general, but women of color specifically.
And okay, great. Thank you for that. And so, did you have anything to add? And so, that being one of the issues, that again, that do you think that that issue affects white lesbian? What are the? I want to understand what are some of the differences, or how that group worked inside the gay community in general, and what was the dynamics with other gay groups and with other groups, like with white male groups and with black male groups and with white female groups. What was sort of the uniqueness about, and politically and culturally and socially, about how this group fit in with other gay groups? Who else? I mean,
You want to take it?
I know,
well,
like she.
sorry, just and for the record, it's probably good to get it historically and then currently. So,
Okay.
because I want to get it historically and then,
Okay.
and so for around that period of time, and then we'll go to present. Sorry.
Okay. When I came to Alush, Alush was already around for some period of time. We used to have some interaction with one white group. I remember there were two women that used to come, and I don't remember what organization it was. Oh, down here. I don't remember. Okay. I don't remember the name of the organization, but I remember that there were two white women that used to come to the group, sporadically. They used to come in, and that was sort of the groups trying to, reach across the racial aisle, to have some sort of interaction. Oh, I'm sorry, that's probably me.
And the resources, especially that was flowing through this center, which was primarily going to um to meet the needs of the gay white males.
Yeah.
You understand? So like almost 95% of the resources was going to them until Alush, this group formulated and then forced them to then allot some of those resources for women of color, and then Alush then branched off into all these other different organizations like what is it?
Are we paused?
Circle of
Are we-
Voices.
No, we're not recording yet. That's why I was just trying to understand. Yeah.
Oh,
that's
okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm just
Yeah.
going and going and going.
Yeah. No. You're
But
fine.
you
I was trying to get
But
a
I think
perspective.
you might have to go back a little.
All right. So
Yeah.
we're
So
gonna go.
you wanna mention that before Lush, it was salsa,
Right.
Salsa, but it's the same group.
and when it was salsa,
Yes.
So can you talk to me then? Give me an update, sort of, if you wanted to. We'll start with you, Ms. Rice. What was because I was sort of, you were giving me sort of a background, a sense of some of the different organizations and sort of how they fit into the general structure of community in general. And so can you just sort of start from the beginning, or just a quick snapshot of how because I don't think you also mentioned what Alush stands for. Did you?
Yes, okay. So Alush stands for African Ancestral Lesbians United for Societal Change.
Got it. So for the record, Alush is the group that, all right, great, the one we were talking about.
Yes.
So, great.
Yes. The organization was founded in 1974, and although it went through some different variations of names, the most popular was Salsa Soul Sisters, Third World Women, Inc. Salsa Soul Sisters was founded, they were women of color, so they were largely um, African ancestry and Latina. There were some Native Americans originally, um, and I have to say I'm not entirely sure of when the break happened, but at some point, they dealt with women of color issues. At some point, the numbers where the the uh, the Latina women wanted to branch off and have their own organization so that they could deal with their own issues, and that organization became Los Buenos Amigos. And then Salsa Soul Sisters, even though they kept the name Salsa Soul Sisters, the salsa basically left the organization, and it was really a black lesbian organization, at that time. At some point, they renamed the organization so that they were actually being identified, with black women, and they came out of the closet and changed the name from Salsa Soul Sisters to African Ancestral Lesbians United for Societal Change. So,
No, go ahead.
yeah, they came out of the closet, in the name, so that women of color, so that they could reach out to black lesbians in the area, so that they knew that they had someplace to go that was for them, by them.
And so, with regard to white women, or how did you guys interact with white gay men? Well, actually, first, how did you interact with black gay men, and then how did you interact with white gay men?
Salsa Soul Sisters had, as being one of the very early organizations for people of color in the New York area, also, I'm going to say probably encouraged the branching out. There were some gay men's organizations that came about afterwards, Gay Men of African Descent, which was Salsa Soul's really sort of brother organization at the time, back in, because I'm not sure when GMAD originated, but I'm going to say probably in the
That's who
80s.
George Mellinger, and people like that. I have interviewed him also.
Okay, that they did really events and stuff together when they started doing the Kwanzaa in the 80s. I'm gonna say that was something that that Salsa Soul Sisters and GMAD both did together. But I think that Salsa Soul was instrumental in black people organizing in the early days. So although Salsa was, I think, one of the first ones, G-Man came. I believe Adoti also came after that. So in just talking to some other brothers, it was Salsa Soul, and I remember them saying, or being going out to watch the parade and seeing all the black women, that then they were able to now come together and organize and stuff, given the example of Salsa Soul. Because it almost seemed like, organizing was really something that white people did and not really necessarily something that black people did.
But having a history of civil rights movement and all those other things, you would think that black people would have a knowledge of that. And sorry, go ahead. You can switch the microphone.
Yes, like you would think that coming out of the civil rights movement, but the important thing you know,
And this is Justice talking, by the way.
oh yeah, I'm sorry, this is Justice. To note is that we were not embraced in our communities. So even though we face the same social and economic problems because of our sexuality, these organizations would reject us. You understand? So not only did we have the exact same issues as every other person of color, it was compounded with the fact that we were gay. So that's why it was to go across the aisle. Even though there was a common ground, there was this prejudice. There was this, so they didn't work with us. Like we were shunned, and so then we had to sit down and then decide what is it exactly, women of color, what is it exactly we need, and then we had to organize and advocate for that because we didn't have that within our communities, even though we were experiencing the exact same thing.
Right, and even other organizations at the time. So like women's organizations, that were trying to deal with women's issues. We're still mostly white women, so that you still had the same. All the racial stuff that was happening just in society in general was also happening there. And then if you went into an organization like the Black Panthers or something like that, which was really, at the forefront of really trying to, get, black empowerment, they also didn't want, gay people around. So we were really kind of getting it, no matter where we, were. So that's one of the reasons why, when Salsa Soul started, it was really cutting edge. It was also, the first out black lesbian organization in the country.
Yes.
And so, in terms of then that dynamic, how did that dynamic go from there? What other sort of major successes or even failures could you sort of talk to for that period of time?
That's probably harder.
I mean, if you want to.
You want to speak more?
I don't know.
We
I
can,
mean, that's kind of.
I wish I knew what other organizations beside Los Buenos Amigos came out of Salsa, because that would be really good to know. Okay.
So, what did you, so in terms of
We're on now?
Well, no, yeah, we're recording, yes.
Okay.
So in terms of, looking back at your history and the history, like, how do you think, what does Stonewall mean to you in terms of, like, that history? Like, you talked a little bit about these groups and their impact and what they had sort of politically and culturally during the time. But what is something, if you can, maybe, what impact do you think Stonewall had on these groups in terms of their mobilization and their ability to get some of the things done that they did?
Okay. So I was a child when Stonewall happened, but what I know, just from speaking to other women at Alush, is that the main benefit, I'm going to say, that came out of Stonewall was groups, pulling together, really trying to become more organized, really trying to be heard, to reach out politically, to try and get equality. But the main thing was to just have people just come out of the closet. Because when you came out of the closet, then people couldn't just deny that. We're like, oh, well, I don't know any gay people, or they could just say, oh, those people over there, and not thinking that, those people over there included, their cousin or their sister or their aunt, or their brother or somebody right in their own, right in their own immediate circle. So the main thing was to come out of the closet, and as soon as you come out of the closet, then you're seen. And as soon as you're seen, by one person, somebody that loves you, then you have an ally. And so the most important thing was to come out of the closet.
And did you, do you credit those, how do you credit those groups, how do you credit those groups today? Like, in terms of crediting those groups, how do you credit those groups today? Not just Stonewall, but also the groups you helped in the late 90s. How do you credit that with what we see today in terms of life for gay people?
I think it's the same thing. I think as soon as, when it was really very, very hard for people, after Stonewall, 69 in the early 70s, when it was very hard, when you could get fired from your job and, everything else, that as soon as some of that work started to get done, as soon as, there were, the laws started to get put on the books where, you couldn't be fired from your job, that then it always makes it easier for the next person, to be able to, come out. But the thing is to gain numbers. So, you had the pioneers very early on, doing the work in the 70s, by time, the 80s and the 90s came, along, I think it was just more important to just try to, push the envelope and to just see, because a lot of times you could get something on the books, but people still were getting fired, even though there may have been, some rule against it, you just kind of work around it. You say, that it's because you were late or something like that. When really, like the reason that you're getting, targeted. So I still think, that's, that it's in the numbers, that it's in coming out, and that like gay marriage like never would have happened, if everybody didn't think that they knew somebody that this affected, so that when more people are out in their communities, which is the main thing, is that you have to be out in your community. You have to be at home, you have to be with your family, your neighbors, and that when that happens, that then you get more allies, and the more allies you get, the more people know, that, oh, yeah, oh, well, the nice ladies down the block, with the cats, that it becomes harder to discriminate against somebody as soon as you can put a face to that person, and that's what all of the organizations did, that they gave you the courage to be out in your own neighborhood. Like one of the groups, especially, had to do with coming out, because coming out isn't a single process. It's, it isn't a single event. It's always a process. First you're going to come out probably to your family or some of your family, and then you have to come out to the rest. You have to come out at your work. You got to come out to the doctor, and it's always important to always have these conversations so that you are getting recognized, for who you are and for all that you are.
Well, thank you very much then. Thank you very much. Any last minute words also, Justice?
No, I was just,
Yeah, just to answer that question, it made us human. You understand? It was, it wasn't you're gay. These organizations, Stonewall, made me simply, I'm Justice. I'm a human being, and because of that, once you become human, once you become visible, how people handle you has to change, because we are part of the same species. You understand? And as long as we were closeted, then we could be treated like some subhuman race of people. And so that I think for me personally, that was the biggest thing, is that it made us visible, it made us human.
Well, thank you both very much. It was a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for your time and patience today.
Thank you.